In the previous video, we learned about the different varieties of autotrophs, that being organisms that can produce their own energy through a variety of different chemical reactions. In this video, we're going to explore the different types of heterotrophs that exist, that being organisms that cannot produce all of their own energy directly. So the first of these are the rather unusual photoheterotrophs that do require consumption of other organisms in order to get sugar, but that can make use of sunlight for other chemical reactions in their metabolism. This video will focus exclusively on a group of organisms that we call the chemoheterotrophs, of which there are many different varieties, humans of which are definitely one. Now, unlike photoheterotrophs that can at least partly use sunlight, chemoheterotrophs cannot produce their own energy at all, and therefore these are recognized as the true consumers because they can only get their energy through consuming other organisms, and depending on what kind of organisms they consume, that determines what their trophy is. For example, this water buffalo we see is clearly eating grass here. This is an example of a chemoheterotroph that we call a herbivore, which are chemoheterotrophs that eat exclusively plants. Or if not plants, if you would prefer to use the term producer, meaning any organism that is able to make its own energy, that is more correct for the definition of herbivore. Now, the opposite of this water buffalo would be an example of an animal like this lion here that we can see is eating meat. This makes the lion a carnivore, which is a chemoheterotroph that exclusively eats other organisms that contain some sort of meat. So this means that a carnivore, rather than getting their energy by eating producers, carnivores get their energy by eating other consumers, such as whatever this animal used to be. Now, these are the most simple forms of chemoheterotrophs, but we see that there are a lot of different varieties, including humans. So if we look at the spaghetti that this man is eating, well, we know that the pasta is made from grains, which are a plant, but we see the meat sauce contains meat. So humans are an example of a type of heterotrophs that we call an omnivore. So the prefix omni is a Latin prefix that means all. So omnivores are literally everything eaters, meaning that they can eat both plants, meaning producers, and meat, meaning other consumers. Another obvious example of an omnivore are bears. Bears we frequently think of as meat eaters, but bears will be happy eating berries or other plant-based matter if it's difficult for them to find meat. However, the most important examples of consumers, at least from an ecological perspective, are a type of consumer that we call detritivores. So detritivores, if we break down this word, the beginning of this is a prefix called detritus that literally means garbage or waste. Detritivores are examples of chemoheterotrophs that eat organisms that are already dead. So the examples that are listed here, this is a catfish that is a bottom-feeding type of fish that eats the dead remains of organisms that die and sink to the bottom of the pond. Whereas this, the emerald ash borer, is a type of beetle that specifically burrows and eats the dead wood of trees in order to gain energy. Now, closely related to detritivores are a type of consumer that we call decomposers. So decomposers are also chemoheterotrophs. They cannot make their own energy, but instead of physically eating dead organisms, decomposers chemically break down dead organisms, and probably the easiest and most recognizable example of a decomposer is this fungus here. Now, the definitions of detritivores and decomposers look very similar. They're both chemoheterotrophs, and they both get their energy from consuming dead organisms, but these two words are actually not the same and have a slight variation. So detritivores actually eat other organisms, meaning that they have a mouth and the inside organ system, which is what we call a digestive system, such as a stomach, intestines, and the like, whereas decomposers do not actually have this and instead release chemicals outside of them to break down organic matter, which they then absorb. So in more detail, if we take a look at an example of a decomposer and a detritivore, let's take a look at the snail, for example. So is the snail the decomposer or the detritivore? Well, the snail is an animal, and therefore the snail actually has a mouth that it's able to chew up this dead apple through, and therefore ingest it into its stomach and break it down inside. So the snail, because it actually eats through a mouth, is an example of a detritivore rather than a decomposer, because there is actually the process of eating that happens here. Now, fungi, like these mushrooms here, obviously don't have a mouth, which means that they can't put food in their mouths in the way that a detritivore do. So, instead, what they do is release a type of chemical that are called digestive enzymes. And the job of digestive enzymes is that these are chemicals that are released by the fungi into the dead organic matter that they're living on, usually a dead tree. And what digestive enzymes do is they chemically break down food externally from the fungus. So what this means is that the enzymes will actually break down the food before the food makes it into the fungus, and then the fungus is then able to absorb all of the nutrients that are broken down by these digestive enzymes directly into their structure without actually having to bite and chew on food the way that a detritivore does. This concludes our series on the different levels of trophic organization, specifically on chemoheterotrophs. In the next video, we're going to be focusing on interactions of organisms within an ecosystem that do not involve eating or being eaten.